My name is Judy Torres. I am the Executive Director of the Taos Valley Acequia Association.
I'm Solomon Kaplan. I'm the mayordomo on the Atalaya ditch.
I'm also a Parciente on the Atalaya ditch.
Hi, I'm Emery. I'm with the Taos News, so I would be one of those people that you will be voting upon. But I'm happy to be here and learn either way.
Sylvia Rodriguez, I'm a commissioner on the Acequia de San Antonio, and I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I really appreciate Robin's work. I think he does incredibly important work, and Pedro is an old warrior on the Rio Hondo, but I'm also, wanting us to be careful. And I'm just wondering if it would have a chilling effect if we really start talking about it. But, I guess I'm abstaining.
Might be good to have it out there too.
Were we supposed to?
Yes, it might also
as
be,
we do this ourselves?
it might also be good to have out there. I don't know, there may be, I don't know.
We could have a discussion
Depends on how
about
other people feel. I tend to be cagey about, cautious about some things.
Priscilla Real, former commissioner on the Acequia San Antonio, Paciente Valdez. Transparency is key, I think, and I think it's important as we weigh out the cautious nature of things. I think it's important to get our story heard and told and seen, because then where is our voice? So that's one thing that I feel is important, that we be able to get, our story out the way we need to. And so I vote that we do produce something, whether it's in common with taking things out or that's my feeling.
Floyd Archuleta belongs to the TVAA and Rio Hondo, part of the Revalse ditch. I guess I look at it the way, in a way that we can say whatever we want to say, but then the Forest Service approves it anyway. And it's a lot of work because we went through a lot, and I think our issues were so important. And maybe the best thing to just have to do a moratorium if it's even allowed. And if it ever goes to court, are we going to be able to find a billionaire? I doubt it. But at this point, I think we need people need to hear our voices anyway. That's what I thought.
I'm a visitor. I'm from Taos Mountain Alliance, and my name is Daniel Weeks. Our group is interested in many of the aspects of what's happening in the Ski Valley, certainly about the water and the environment. Our biggest push right now is about saving the public access to Williams Lake, and that's what we're working on right now. And anything that I would say, I'd be happy to say openly, but I would be careful what I say in terms of what lawsuit we might bring.
I'm Brian Long, and I live in Des Montes, naturalist, and concerned about the whole Ski Valley expansion and all of that for years and years, and I just see it going badly. So I think we should have our voice heard. I'll vote for that.
I'm Fabiola Teeter. I'm on the Parciente on Louis Ditches. We have a very limited supply, and has gotten more limited as time has gone on. I'm very concerned about the expansion that is taking place at Taos Ski Valley. The water situation will get far more serious as we expand more and more. And just coming into this meeting a few minutes ago, I drove right by the Rio Hondo stream that goes right along where I live. And that stream in segments is completely dry right now. And so we can see that whatever water that we've got right now, some of it has been probably diverted to hopefully some of the ditches that may be getting some water. But for the most part, as the summer is coming along, there probably won't be much water for anybody to be irrigating. And we depend on that water for our living and our livelihood. And I think it's time that Taos Ski Valley recognizes that we cannot be so selfish that they forget the people that live downstream and depend on their lands and their water, and even their well systems that will eventually dry up. So I think this is a very crucial matter, and I think that our agencies need to look at that. And it's not something that we are just bringing up just to bring up because we don't want them to operate. It's a matter of preserving life right now. So I think that needs to be taken care of. And once again, our agencies who pretty much, are on top of what's going on need to pay a little more attention to what we are saying.
Mr. Arguello, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, David Fermin Arguello from Valdez, San Antonio Ditch.
I just want to say with KCEI, we have really wanted to have this on the radio, the issues, and we ran into the same problem with the Taos Valley Association. There's this imagination that you can negotiate directly with the Ski Valley. You don't need to inform people about what's happening. The problem is the Ski Valley and the supporters of these kinds of developments, they get their word out. And if you don't get your word out and educate the public about the issues, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And, it may be, specific legal strategies you might not want to talk about, but you've got to be able to inform people about the issues. And people don't realize the radio is 60 to 70% of the people in the country get their information from radio. Some of it's not good information, but we're shocked at how many people listen to us. And I just would encourage you to see the value of radio. If you don't want to be, like I say, anybody wants to have their segment taken out, I'd be glad to take it out. But educating the public is extremely important to this issue.
I'm Phaedra Greenwood, and former secretary of the Committee to Save the Rio Hondo, in which Fabi was president of for a number of years. We fought expansion at Taos Ski Valley for 5 years, and we won some important things. We got a seat at the table with different committees about what kind of filtration was going to be used at the plant and the parking lot, and how big the pipes were going to be, and we walked it, we talked it, and we spoke up at every single meeting and got sued. And it went on for a long time. It was very painful. Some of us had to drop out. It was a hard battle. He was there at the march. We did up. I got a picture of you holding a sign up there. We went up and demonstrated at the Ski Valley and put ourselves at risk and did a lot of speaking out in the day. We started out fighting that sewage treatment plant. They wanted the government to pay for a new, bigger sewage treatment plant. We knew that just meant more development. And here we are. More development, more development, more development. When does it stop? When do we get some morality around water sharing? Do we have to wait till life down here dies? What about the riparian area? What about the Rio Grande? What about all the people downstream? Those things need to be considered. They need to be spoken up about. And if we just stay quiet, fine, they'll do whatever they want. And they always do anyway, but at least we have a say. While we have a say, we should say it.
Enrique introduce himself.
I'm sorry, I'm the only one that hasn't gone yet. So it's nice to see some familiar faces. My name is Enrique Romero. I'm with the New Mexico Department of Justice. With the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty Division, I'm the division director there. And I did want to, give a little bit of an introduction in terms of why we're here. And I see that this meeting was sort of at our request, right? Because we saw that the EA, the final decision from the Forest Service had come down from Mr. Duran. And so we became involved, I want to say it was just a little over a year ago. I've been in this position as a division director at the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo Division for a little over a year and a half. And one of the first things that came across our desk was some inquiries and complaints about the process that took place below during the scoping period, during various meetings. I think there were a couple of meetings that we had heard from constituents about, various narratives about what was happening during those scoping periods and excluding local communities from that process, or it just not being really, amenable to the way that our communities, our traditional communities, want to interact with the Forest Service. So we did write a letter to, at that time it was the interim Forest Supervisor, Jack Lewis, I believe, or I think it was Lewis, letting him know that we wanted to participate in any further discussions when it came to this decision, including any discussions with the land grants or the Acequias that would be directly impacted. And so we've been monitoring all of this as it takes place, as people come to us with updates. But we ourselves, as the Department of Justice or the Treaty Division, we've not formally entered any sort of comments or objections. But one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of circle back is that we did get direct notice per our request to the Forest Service of a final decision. The Forest Service was good enough to send us the information, let us know that the final decision had come down. We wanted to, again, convene. I mean, this is a small group. I know there's plenty more people out there that filed objections and comments during the scoping period. But we wanted to convene a meeting with the local public bodies, the local stakeholders, those most directly impacted, because to me, that's, at least within the division, the Treaty Division, our constituents are land grant and Acequia elected officials, right? And so we did want to engage TVAA to see what the appetite was to have Acequia commissioners here, also with the Land Grant Council and the land grants that are within the area to see what their appetite was to have, again, an intimate gathering to kind of talk about what are the next steps, also to kind of get a sense from you all as to Ms. Teeter's, comments about agency, letting the agencies know what's happening. We can't control what's happening with the federal government, but I do know that our office is very much interested in staying up to date in terms of what's happening with this particular decision. But we also want to hear how you feel, and again, this is a pre-meeting to a meeting with the Forest Service, but how you feel this decision is or is not addressing your concerns. And I think ultimately what we feel like we can provide at some point, probably not today, but is some guidance in terms of once we've identified those Acequias and land grants that feel like their stakes are, they're stakeholders and they're going to be impacted by the decision, what are the things that you need to look for in order to kind of trigger the legal process, right? What is the harm, what is the injury that's going to trigger further litigation? And I understand that I think nobody wants to litigate, but that might be, kind of an option down the road. Again, it may just depend on how your conversations go with the Forest Service in terms of whether they're, again, the decision's final, but, in terms of monitoring the decision, again, expressing your, what is that you feel it has not been addressed by the decision. So that's why I'm here today is, again, this is more of a roundtable for certainly for me to take back to our leadership at the agency, to hear how you're feeling about the decision and what it is that is not being addressed. Some folks already had mentioned, water quality and water quantity issues. We feel like that's probably, at least for the Acequias, a primary concern. We'd like to hear from the land grants as well at some point in terms of what they feel the concerns are with the decision. And then, again, engaging as appropriate further on down the line with particular stakeholders, preferably Acequia commissioners and land grant officials, to see how we can support any further litigation or negotiations or discussions with the Forest Service. So that's a long-winded introduction, but I just wanted to put it out there. That's why we're here today at the Department of Justice.
Thank you.
So I'm really glad to hear that you're here, and now I understand sort of the purpose of this meeting. I just want to quickly give the perspective from my group, which had many people do protest comments. We were very involved in the process. The decision's out, and the condition on the gondola being built is that it can only run during operation of the winter or summer recreation to carry pass-carrying recreators, not to move public up and down the mountain. And so that might have a result on the development up there. And of course, the development has a lot to do with the water, and it's all related. But our group is very disappointed with the Forest Service, and I'm glad that you're going to meet with them. We have regular meetings with the Forest Service and with the village about forest access, but we asked them about a lot of things. We were very disappointed to find out that the decision maker had not even read our protest comments a week before the decision was put out. And so we quickly scrambled to try to find out about the process and learned that there were other entities, people that were doing some of the decision making, and Mr. Duran was perhaps, not necessarily as educated or knowledgeable about it as he could have, and that is our biggest problem with the decision. But we are in a position now where what we see is everything was approved. There's a tweak on the requirements for the use of the gondola, but everything else that affects the environment and the water is all about a very vague notion of the developers should consider this. The developers should keep pollution from falling in the river. And there's nothing formal that they really have to follow with, maybe showing where the water rights come from or something, but the actual decision doesn't give anything tangible about how they're going to conduct the development and how protection of the environment is going to occur. And so that's the perspective I was glad to bring, and it's nice to give it in your presence. Thank you.
I'd like to say yes. So, like Phaedra said, we've been opposing these kinds of developments for, at least I have, for 40 years. I was at a protest at Taos Ski Valley when I was 8 years old, and here we are again. And the Forest Service has rarely, if ever, said no to anything that the Ski Valley has asked for. It's almost a foregone conclusion, and the whole public process is just a formality that they have to go through, but they don't really want to. And they do it to appease the public, and they know that it's going to be approved the whole time, and that's always what happens, and it happened again. And they waste our time and wear us down, make us go through this very specific process where if you want your comment to be looked at all, you have to do it a certain way. And then they often don't even look at the comments, even when people do it the right way. And they've received hundreds of comments, maybe even thousands, almost all in opposition of these developments. And obviously, they have chosen to ignore them. They've completely ignored them. They haven't addressed a single concern that has been raised in all of these comments. What they approved is exactly what was proposed, and we have made no impact whatsoever. So it just goes to show that this public process is a complete sham, and if we want any results, it has to be either through a legal process where we actually sue somebody, and I don't know who that would be or exactly what for, but the other option is direct action. We have to protest. We have to chain ourselves to the gondola or whatever. Go there, enforce, block the roads, stop them from doing it because they don't listen to us. If we want to stop them, we have to get more extreme. either in a legal way or in a direct action way. Those are options. That's all I can see.
This is David Fermin. I live at the mouth of Valdez. I'm the third house from the east side of the village. And I own a property that I've inherited from my great-grandparents. And my well was built in 1964, so my well is 61 years old. Its water table used to be at 20 feet. This January, it dropped down to 3 feet where my pump couldn't reach it, and it ran until it burned out. So that's how I found out. So it took 17 days to, of no use, to have a plumber come in and put a new pump. This pump has a switch that turns the pump off when the water level gets below it, so it won't burn out. So after 17 days, my water table was less than 10 feet. So after 61 years, that well has been very productive. I use it to water my garden sometimes. I have a bonfire by my pond and run the water probably 15 hours while my bonfire is burning. Never had any trouble into that. So I don't know about the wells in the east end of the village, but certainly I have a major issue with my well. I can use it very sparingly. So we're very monitoring the amount of water that goes down the drain. We can't use our washer when we shower. It's very quick showers, and my wife and I shower together. We've been together 55 years, so it's pleasant to spend some very good time in the shower together. And flushing the toilet is a big concern because that's about 5 gallons of water, so very disciplined flushing the toilet. So that's a big concern. My solution that I've been told, because my well, my old well, is in an orchard. There is no way that a drilling rig can get near it. So I have to drill a new well, which would be about 100 yards north of my house, and that means I would have to run the water down to about 100 yards. The estimated cost for that is about $30,000. And my wife and I are retired. We have some retirement benefits in Social Security, and that's our income. So $30,000 is certainly out of the question for us. That's a major concern, very personal concern. I think that the Ski Valley has a 5 million gallon water tank for reserve. Well, I would like to have some of that in my house on reserve too. So I don't know, 50 million, 500, how many million? 5 million. That's an awful lot of water. And I hope it's not going to be used at all for making snow. The river is absolutely dry. The Acequia de Montes just opened up. The Acequia de San Antonio is running, but they'll probably be running for a very short time because of the drought. So the concern is very personal to me. I work at the Ski Valley. My father, my brother-in-law, my nephews have worked at the Ski Valley. My father was one of the ones that cut down Al's Run. So he was very early on as a logger working there. And the last year I worked was the summer of 1967. So I know the Blakes. And they were quite easy, user-friendly, and very arrogant. You know? this concerns me a lot. That 5 million gallon water tank seems to me at the headquarters of the Rio Hondo. They're stealing the water at its very origin. And I do mean stealing it. It's never done before, and it is something brand new that shouldn't be done. I did protest against that with a number. I'm also a member of the Acequia San Antonio and the Rio Hondo Arriba land grant. And as a group, we protested. But again, the protest fell in deaf ears.
Before any more comments, if I could ask some questions of the group, but just your comments made me think of a couple of questions. So are there any mutual domestics serving the downstream communities? And I guess before I get there, there are several communities immediately downstream from the Taos Ski Valley. Would someone just mind running them down a list just so that I can orient myself? What are the various communities downstream from the Ski Valley?
Well, there's Valdez, and Valdez is probably, the valley is about probably 3 miles long with residentials down in the valley. The other thing that's happened is, the whole hillside north of the valley has been populated by what I would call at least moderately rich people, because the houses all of those have wells, and that's draining our aquifer. Below us is a little village called Cañoncito, and then below that is Rio Hondo. In my mind, those are the 3 villages. Want to verify that?
He's asking, can you think of another?
The villages Valdez, Cañoncito, and Arroyo Hondo.
Montes.
Well, this Montes is up on the hill, but they get 41% of the river water for agriculture. 41% of the water goes up this Montes.
Because of the acreage.
Yeah.
And then the mutual domestics, are there mutual domestics serving any of those communities?
Valdez has one, and Arroyo Hondo, I think, has 2.
We have to.
And you have 2, yeah. And this Montes has 2.
This Montes, okay. And do you folks know whether those mutual domestics have been part of oftentimes the board members of mutual domestics are also those folks that are on Acequias or land grants, but do you know if any of those have protested or commented during the scoping period?
Sylvia is our commissioner, and she certainly has been active for San Antonio.
Yes, there's a mutual domestic in the central Placita area of Valdez, which serves, I think, about, 37, 40 people. The rest of the valley is on individual wells and septics. I don't know anybody in Valdez who's been there a long time who isn't upset about the Ski Valley and who hasn't been for like a couple of generations now. You don't even have to bring it up. People are watching.
I believe that the downstream Arroyo Hondo area, many of their members have definitely outwardly participated in some of these protests that we have done that date back to what Saul Kaplan just spoke about. And that's been 40 years or so since we've been affected by this. But as time has gone on, we have been more and more adversely affected. And the biggest question also is, due to the expansion, as Mr. Aguero has mentioned, there's my understanding, and part of the development plan for them up there is to develop a very large not hotel area, but restaurant area up at the top. I'm not sure where they think they're going to get their water, or where they think they're going to get rid of their sewage, even though they do have a sewage plant, but how they're going to get that all the way down to the sewage plant is certainly of some concern. That was one of the reasons, and major reasons, when we first got involved with the initial protest 40-some years ago is because they were actually dumping into the river, their effluent right into the river. EID at that time became quite involved, and it was through their efforts at that time. They were very conscientious about it, and so they certainly did come out and check everything out. I was also involved with the EPA organization that traveled to discuss these situation with them. And that situation, as far as the amount of water, is not being resolved, and it's not going to be resolved. Eventually, I believe that the downstream communities will not have the water they need for their gardens, for drinking even. There are not only domestic wells probably, but there are also small wells like Mr. Aguero's that are not connected to a domestic well, that are dependent on that. And ever since, as others have mentioned here, the Forest Service has given lip service, and even at present are not really listening to the issues at hand and refuse to do a full environmental impact statement, because that will, of course, show that they're not following even their own regulations.
Are there still concerns about effluent or their septic system?
There, some money that came into the county about 3 years ago that was something that was skimmed off a $130 million request that the governor invited the Ski Valley to apply for to cover their commercial development, including the gondola and stuff, which was more or less stopped because of mass spontaneous protest at a commission meeting that was online. To make a long story short, $5 million came into Taos County, much of which went to the Taos Watershed Coalition. $500,000 of that were applied for by the ad hoc Rio Hondo commissioners, which included Cliff Bain, Charles Mieta, and myself representing the communities. And we had a proposal that was drawn up actually by a scientist that was accepted, and then Weary was, when we couldn't find a fiscal agent, then Peter's office served as the fiscal agent and worked out a contract with Weary to do what was about a 2-year water monitoring process that was much more extensive and sophisticated and multi-sites than ever has been done before. It took them almost half that time to actually get all the protocols and figure out which labs. Their findings were that the water is pretty clean. Okay. Their final results will be made public, I think, sometime this spring or summer.
Were they also monitoring, or are there gauging stations along the river to monitor flows and quantity?
Yes, they've done several parameters. I didn't bring that report. It's available publicly, and I don't know where all the sites are exactly, but they're above, the sewage treatment plant, below the sewage treatment plant. Various sites. I think there were like 19 sites. I could be wrong.
But are they also monitoring the quantity coming down? Do you know if there's?
I think they're measuring flow.
Okay.
And of course that has an effect on what's in the water. In other words, the lower the flow, the more. So that was just, 2 years. It should be a permanent thing, but that costs a lot of money. Amigos Bravos is monitored periodically over the years. The EPA's data is extremely hard to access, and it seems to me Phaedra has tried for years to get it. I think Cliff has also tried, or to interpret it.
Where does the EPA data come from?
You must know, Phaedra.
Yeah, those reports, the EPA reports initially came from the EPA, but now they're self-monitoring.
Okay.
And They had some breakdowns in their system over the winter and in the spring. The pipes broke, the pipes that were supplying water to the village, they had to shut down. They said it wasn't important because it wasn't sewage, it was water. And that goes through the parking lot and it takes up everything, everybody that's driving across there, the gasoline, all the pollutants from that. And nobody could use the restrooms, I suppose. And they had to shut down, and I was looking for those records, and I ended up having to drive up there and pay $30 to get them printed out on their own printer.
So they have monitoring stations within the Ski Valley.
Yes, they monitor the plant.
So they're monitoring both the water quality, and then are they also monitoring their use? So I'm assuming that their wells and other things are metered.
Yeah, they are. They are, and there's always arguments about, oh, you're raising the rates, we don't want to pay this much for water. And somebody should mention Amazet. They're a community downstream from the Ski Valley that are not on the sewage treatment plant because they're downstream from it. They have private wells and they have septic tanks, and they're very close to the river, and they know that they're leaking into the river, and they haven't been able to do anything about it, apparently. And that was a concern that the Green Corridor would have bribed us, tempted us to take their deal, because that Green Corridor proposal, was going to have electric buses, and it was going to have, all this green transportation, and they were going to put Amazet on the plant, although they'd have to pump it uphill. But that hasn't happened, and there's going to be that, and as the river gets lower, it gets more and more toxic. And there are, up until last year, our domestic system was from the river, and I'm very conscious of what is in it because of that. And finally we got our own well, but I don't know how safe it is, for anybody who has to use that for domestic purposes.
Does this also, I did want to mention that NMSU did a whole study on the Rio Hondo and conclusively proved that the surface wells that people have individually were directly connected with the acequias. And that obviously if the acequia flow stops, that's why the wells drop, basically. I mean, if there's not water, you were saying there's not even water in the river, that directly affects all the wells. And so the Ski Valley can claim that they're not using this water, but if the acequias aren't flowing, people don't have domestic water for their houses. And that MSU study was very thorough and it's a groundbreaking study.
Sure. Is anyone aware, or I don't know if it was part of the application, but is there a map that shows where the various monitoring stations are on the Taos Ski Valley?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And when, many years ago, when all of the talk about the expansion was supposed to start, they promised that they were going to be sending TVA the EPA report. We got 2 maybe, and then they stopped. And they said that they would only send us a report if there was concern that there was a leakage or anything. But we've never ever been notified by the EPA. They've never sent any other reports. It just completely stopped right away.
One of the things in the news release talks about some changes that were made between the draft EA and the final EA. One of them says that the water conservation plan will include water quality and quantity strategies and monitoring requirements. The gentleman earlier mentioned that a lot of these things are, in terms of development, seem to be shoulds as opposed to musts, but does anybody have an opinion about whether the monitoring requirements as part of the decision kind of get to the issue of inconsistent monitoring, promises that weren't kept in terms of reporting? I just want to see if there's any concern that, there still remains a concern even with this EA that they are not going to be required, or, okay, could you
It took years. I, for years, requested exceedance reports. There were 2 or 3 years which we actually did get exceedance reports retrospective that were among exceedance of ammonia after the Christmas season. Those stopped repeatedly have asked them to resume. They keep promising they will, and they never do. They've continuously promised to provide this information, but have not done so.
Those who have read the EA, do you feel like this is a hard and strict requirement that they now produce these? Some are saying yes, some are saying no. So is it a hard and fast requirement that they now produce these reports or not?
Oh. Maybe misunderstood.
Okay, sure.
The way I read it is there are PDCs that are listed, and they read as though you should do this. There's nothing in there that's formal. That's what I was making out before. There's a couple of aspects of the decision that's formal, but nothing that you would expect from such a weak assessment of the whole thing to an environmental assessment rather than a full environmental impact study. So,
My opinion now is, they did the water test and it showed it was clean, right? But there was a lot of water coming down.
Yeah.
Now is the crucial time for us to do monitoring, because the water table is so down that I think the readings are going to be so much different now. On David's issue about not having water, what I've done, because I have gardens and I really have water for cattle, I get cisterns, water cisterns. You have to pump it into your, but that could be used for almost anything except drinking. But that's a solution for you in the meantime.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And it'd be nice to catch water, but it hasn't rained. It's nice.
I want to expand on my point a little bit, because by coincidence, the plumber that fixed my well as best as he could is related by marriage to one of the members of the Lower Desmontes who has a private well. His private well feeds his house and 4 other houses, and had the same problem that I do. The water table was below the pump, and the pump burned out. So that's how he was able to come up with the system of a special switch called a coyote switch that turns the pump off when the water table gets low. So that well in Desmontes had the same problem that mine did. That is that the water table went below where the pump was and burned out the pump.
Is there a sense, I'm sorry, so just one question, and I know you had your hand up. Is there a sense that this proposal, because we've talked about sort of future developments, and it seems like just based on this short bullets that are listed in the notice, this kind of shows what projects have been approved. But just on this decision and this application, this permit, is there going to be an increased use of water? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? Is that something that has been detailed, and what are the concerns about either, about that?
They claim they use less than 1% what the Acequias are using with the downstreams, which is hydrologically unbelievable, but they do make that claim. They claim they are underusing their allocation.
Sure.
But what's the basis? So as a scientist, things happen in cycles in nature. You have rainfall, you have snowpack, you have melt, you have it soak into the headwaters of the Rio Hondo and the Lake Fork streams. And those things naturally, without any disruption, keep the water tables in Valdez, etc., healthy. If you disturb that cycle, you're going to disturb everything. And that's what's not being talked about. You're asking a really good question, but we shouldn't be asking, well, what is their usage and how will they mitigate the problems? The problem is that valley is fragile and it can't hold the development that's headed their way. It's not going to work.
I'm sorry.
I want to go back a ways. There were about mutual domestic and other users and stakeholders. As you said, many of us are the same people that serve on the same boards or are as part of the same community. But one of the things that I can speak to is that I am one of the mutual domestic members. And what we've seen in the past 15 years is that even though we've replaced our tank and the filtration system of the tank, what we've seen more and more and more is more sediment in the lines, in the water. And so what happens is, as an end user, I'm not a scientist, I'm not all of those things, but as an end user, every few years, we've had to replace our plumbing, our hoses, appliances. Why? Because when we have a problem with our tank, like Floyd was saying, when the water goes so low, if we have a problem with the tank and the engineers have to come out and do something with the tank, if you turn that tank off for, say, 8 hours to get some of the work done, once it goes back on, you're going to have that, sediment that comes through the lines. So what we're losing, and I appreciate your point, is that we're losing that conversation about the end stakeholder, right? Because we have the entities that are supposed to represent us at this table. But then, as members, what are we seeing that maybe isn't coming to the table, right? And it may not seem as significant, but I think some of those details are very, very important. That's one point. And what can a volunteer member board of a mutual domestic, what can they really do for the end 28 users or 34 users, right? And so we need to be looking at this on a larger scope and say, if we have 5 mutual domestics between the downstream villages, how many members do we have? How many stakeholders are those? However, then we look at the paseantes and we look at the 2 or 3, or 4 land grants that are affected and or our associations that are affected by this particular expansion. But I think there's 2 points that we haven't mentioned, and they're sensitive, right? They're very sensitive. And that is that we have to look at what's above the Taos Ski Valley. And I believe that Rio Hondo, from what I've learned in the past several years, that Rio Hondo community, the Rio Hondo grant, has done a good job of bringing at least a couple of things to the fore, which is what is happening at Lobo Creek, what is happening at Gallina Peak, because those are above the Taos Ski Valley. What can we do to protect not just what is below the Taos Ski Valley, which is us, Valdez, the many, many acequias that we haven't even mentioned all the names of, but what can the state agencies and the federal agencies, and which is your role, what can be done to impact that level, and also the level of what the Office of the State Engineer is doing to regulate what they're not regulating. I think that's a sensitive point, right? What's above the Taos Ski Valley, which are the fountainheads of the Rio Hondo, and as far as I understand it, the Rio Hondo grant is part of that movement to protect that, which I completely support. We had a meeting with the Visita in Rio Hondo, was it last year? Where a couple of the members of the Rio Hondo grant said we need to work together and look beyond our differences, because the Taos Ski Valley is really going to be what's going to impact all of us, right? And so the question is, how do we get to a place where not just the agencies are helping to organize that work, but that we actually look within our souls and say, can we really put aside our differences? Because I'll tell you, the Taos Ski Valley is looking at those differences, and they're going to feed on that, right? And they're going to come and say, well, I know you have this problem with this particular party or this problem with that party. Will you help us? Another sensitive issue that we haven't looked at, and gosh, what can we do about it? Hindsight is 2020. Things don't work retroactively, but what about those transfers that were made to the Ski Valley, right? The water right transfers that were made, the Office of the State Engineer approved before we as Acequias had the opportunity to stop those transfers, right? And so we were just talking about that earlier, some of us, about who transferred 40 acre-feet of water to the Taos Ski Valley, and what is that going to do now?
Can you clarify, you're talking about transfers from other regions, not transfers within the watershed of Rio Hondo?
No, but I'm talking about both.
Okay, but
I'm talking about both, and specifically the one I'm mentioning, 40 acre, is right at the desagüe of the Rio Hondo into the Rio Grande. And so, as, you know, it may not be that all of us know this history, as Fabi has said, but a lot of us have worked in this land and water for 30, 40 years, and we're aware of what's happened. So if we're aware of the problems, and/or the new issues that are sensitive to bring up, what will we ask the agencies to help us tackle, not just in representation, ideas, solutions, litigation, but also organization, right? Because that comes down to these volunteer boards not being able to really identify all of the problems. I mean, Sylvia has been working tirelessly when she became secretary of the Acequia de San Antonio with some of the scientific work, Phaedra, all of Fabi, the Rio Hondo, you know, protests. And then the last thing I'd like to say is, last year I had to reach out to Sylvia at the 11th hour and say, Sylvia, I can't, or was it 2 years ago? When I submitted my protest, look, I didn't think twice before I started writing, and I wrote mine in Spanish. And when I went to submit it, it wouldn't accept it. And so I had to rewrite it, because the system that was supposed to carry that protest that you know, uploaded, it wasn't recognizing my ability to put that in. And, you know, that may not seem like a large issue, but in the scope of what we're talking about, in the scope of our ancestors and our livelihood, but also where we came from. You know, I still have the 1936 Departamento de Aguas that my great-grandfather Marcos was a part of. And so the Taos Ski Valley has not been held accountable when it comes to the table of even the litigation. We know that they're not part of the suit. So why is that? They're a water user. So those are just, I think, more questions than they are answers.
Just a couple of thoughts before. I know there's some more comments I want to make. So I guess one question, well, one observation, just from the comments that I've heard so far, is that I think sort of in our times, right, certain groups are gonna sort of be insulated from the most devastating impacts of climate change. I think this is a good example that the Taos Ski Valley seems to be positioning itself as a big player that is insulating itself from all of the most devastating impacts of climate change, right? So they've got their water rights, they've got their upstream for the most part from all the downstream users, and it's the little guys, it's the Acequias, it's the land grants, it's the individual private well owner, just the mutual domestics that are going to ultimately be impacted and don't have the resources to just dig another well, to dig a deeper well. And so that conversation seems to be, you know, that seems to be the bigger conversation that's taking place about that kind of dynamic. So I just want to acknowledge that that's what I'm hearing in terms of the big picture. You know, the other thing is that mutual domestics, Acequias, land grants, the county, I mean, these are all public bodies, public entities, and who pays the bills for that? It's New Mexico taxpayers, right? So I think that ultimately when the mutual domestics need more water rights or they need to do something with their wells, if it's not the members paying more for their utility, their fees, it's going to be the state that they're going to turn to, which they should, you know, to figure out some solution to getting water to folks. But at the same time, you've got the upstream big user who seems to, again, not be really impacted or is, again, insulating themselves from those impacts. A question about above Taos Ski Valley. You mentioned Lobo Creek. I'm familiar with that issue. You mentioned Gallina Peak, but what is the sort of land ownership pattern above Taos Ski Valley? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it mostly private? And just around, you know, percentages, more or less. Like, what are we looking? Is it Pueblo?
I'm studying maps right now because we're looking at forest access. And when you say above the ski valley, that's not that much. You go up into the basin of the Williams Lake, and then down in there is the riparian area and the watershed around the lake fork. That's snowpack. That's natural. And back to what I was wanting to mention, those things should be studied independent of any development. That should be studied and how it affects the water down in Valdez or Rio Hondo. But to answer your question, if you come down, and I don't know if you're familiar, the Kachina Peak chairlift and the lift 4 chairlift go up into a special use permit, which is Forest Service land, it's public lands. And that is part of the recreation area. If you go up in the natural valley where the historic trail goes into where Williams Lake is, there is private land now mostly owned by the owner of the ski resort. And that comes down to an increasing number of other owners that have been there for a while along the village properties. They're part of the municipality. And that comes down the lake fork down to where it meets the Rio Hondo by the parking lots, by the base of the ski valley. And then you come down below the ski valley and you have various properties owned by the ski resort, owned by private people along the river all the way down to Valdez. So that's kind of the demographic of the ownership. But the one thing I just wanted to make a statement is, it seems to me like all of this discussion about the what-ifs of development are moot at this point, because you're seeing a natural effect. You're seeing some sort of detrimental effect to the water, maybe even its quality. So a study should be done by the state engineers about how much water is really being used by snowmaking. Snowmaking causes evaporation. You spray it in the air and a percentage of it goes away. You put it on the ground and a percentage of it sublimates away before it ever gets into the stream. So, and then you have many new modern and water-hungry resort developments in the basin. There should be a study, that's why we think of a legal action. Stop, injunction, look at what the problem is right now. Because the problem is here, well before the huge development's going to take place. You think that gondola is for skiers, it's not. It's just like in Telluride, it's to move people up into the Kachina Basin so that it's attractive to build many resort developments. As soon as that's done, that fragile valley is going to be dead.
And I think two things, not to cut you off, but I don't want to lose my thought, because I was so...
Oh, for sure.
You did a good job of presenting that. You know, the Interstate Stream Commission has to be involved in that, because obviously, like you said, Peter B. Hill has been involved with soil and water conservation. All of those entities have a certain role, right, that they could play in the study of. But you know, two areas that we haven't mentioned, and I don't know enough about the mapping or the air, but Taos Valley as well as El Salto. And so we need to look at some of that other ridge, right, because what is going on with that? And you're right, I think at a point we have to say, you know, we've got to stop it somehow so that we're heard. But to piggyback on something that Sylvia said, that they're claiming the 1% use, they're pushing themselves off, remember this, as a B corporation. They're not a B Corp. They're not. How can they be? Right? And so we look at the history of what's happened, and what happened in Vail, what happened in Telluride, what happened, I mean, look at, it's there right before our very eyes for us to study. And so we need to find a way that we stop where this is at right now, and is that, to Kaplan's point, I mean, can that really happen?
Unfortunately, the Ski Valley over the years has accumulated more water rights, and they have enough at this point to run the river dry legally by using their water rights. And the Downstream Acequias have a flow sharing agreement where we have to share the water. And we have priority dates, and we have a process. If there's a shortage, we have our ways of dealing with it, but the Ski Valley is not included in that. And it should never have been possible for them to accumulate that many water rights, because if they use them, it will be detrimental to everybody downstream.
Has anyone seen their water right portfolio? else for that.
They've
So-
made it public.
They
They've
have.
made it public.
Yeah.
Because I know a few years ago,
So-
that was part of an issue, is that.
They claim they use a very small amount of the rights that they own, and they claim that almost all of the water they consume comes back to the river through the sewage treatment plant.
And for snowmaking.
And through snowmaking, which runs off
They
into
call
the
it water
river.
farming.
But just because they
Girls water?
they may not be using all their rights at this point, it doesn't mean they never will use more. They have the ability to use a lot more than what they are now.
But
And
there's a
and if
certain-
they decide to do that, it's gonna really hurt us.
Now, there's a certain percentage, I think this is what Priscilla was mentioning, is that there's a certain percentage of their water rights that have at least co-equal seniority to probably some of the downstream
They
Acequias.
want the earliest priority rights.
That's right, yeah.
But do we know how many of those, like, what is the number of acre feet that
Yeah, they have charts.
Well, yeah, but I have a question about that for the state engineer. Maybe someone here knows the answer, but if surface water rights are transferred from an acequia with an 1815 priority, and now the Ski Valley owns them, can they actually use that priority date? Can Taos Ski Valley make a priority call?
Yeah, well, so,
I mean, they're not even using them as surface, they're not using them for agriculture, they don't have acequias, they have diversion head gates that go to pumps for snowmaking.
so priority dates typically do transfer, but I think the interesting things about those water rights, if I recall, having seen some of the documentation regarding the transfer, is that it did move the point of diversion and the place of use and the purpose of use, but I thought that there was some language in the transfer itself that talked about the time of year that it could be used. So, again, the devil's in the details in terms of what the particular language was that the state engineer approved for those permits.
Yeah.
What about the question of where the water rights come from? How many water rights do they own come from someplace that's a different water system? I heard that there's water rights from Chama. Just because the Chama feeds into the Rio Grande, how can that be appropriate?
It's just a paper transfer, basically.
Yeah, it's a paper transfer,
And so
but-
they're not looking at, the actual use of the water.
Right.
You can't transfer, they're doing it, but it's impossible.
Is there, I'm sorry.
We're running short
We
on
are-
time, so.
Let me just ask one question. I'm sorry, Phaedra, just one question. Is there a question and then a comment? Is there a watershed group? I heard folks say about a Save the Rio Hondo coalition, but is there a larger watershed group? And what is the name of that, and how is it active, or what's the history of it?
One of the things that's going on for 2 years now, which has been convened by J.R. Logan, working for the county with federal money, was an offshoot. It was for what's called the Green Corridor Group. It's a subgroup of the larger Taos Watershed Coalition. And we've been meeting in this room, we're now meeting in the Soil and Water Office, and it's been an extraordinary 2 years because everybody's been at the table. There have been people from the Ski Valley, from the village, from the Pueblo, from the Forest Service. There have been downstream commissioners. Floyd has been there. A number of us have been there. And the direction in which it's been going is, the money's running out, but basically to consider formation of a watershed district. And Peter brought in people from Rio Hondo County who formed one, and we're just on the cusp of talking about that, which of course is a whole legal process that involves signatures and elections. And the extraordinary thing about that group is that it's been like a learning, it's been an education, because people have presented, Troughs Unlimited has presented, people have presented on water quality, the Ski Valley is, we're sitting at the, face to face with them. And it's not clear to me whether that's a solution or not, but what's important, I think, is that we're talking about it. Because I'm not pushing the watershed district, because I don't know, it's easily corruptible and easily, preemptible by people for their own interests. But it could be one way of galvanizing the stakeholders to see some agency in the future of the watershed. I basically agree with Saul's analysis. And we won't get anywhere without direct action. The question is, how do you mobilize downstream stakeholders massively?
Well, just with the remaining time, I want to get to Phaedra's comment, and then I think, and then one more comment, but just real quickly, when we were here in Taos, we did 2 trainings with the Acequias and land grants. One of the trainings that we did really involved natural resources, and we had a group from the Rio Santa Cruz and the Espanola Valley talk about a partnership that they have, and it was part of the adjudication. It's related to the adjudication, but they had a whole group of stakeholders and supporters, including the ISC. I believe they provided a letter of support, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Pueblos, the Santa Clara, and I think Okeawinge, the Santa Cruz Irrigation District, the multiple Acequias. So, I mean, I think that, and now they had funding, and it was federal funding to kind of help get that started. But, you know, let us know, let me know how we can be helpful in that discussion in forming a watershed district. I mean, I think we'd like to be part of that discussion because it seems like it is getting the right people together, apart from, like you're saying, direct action or litigation or anything like that. I mean, that seems to be also a forum, and I think we could lend some, you know, resources to that. So if the group
I did
needs...
sponsor a bill, but it didn't go through, I mean, it was set aside for it to help fund this. And people think it might go through next time.
Okay, we only have a few more minutes, so Phaedra, and then...
Well, and if we do a watershed district, it will level the playing field. They will have 1 or 2 seats at the table for a vote. It'll be elected process, we hope, and maybe we'll get a handle on it that way.
But they could opt out, they don't have to be part.
Sure.
I'll just say real quickly, as a former skier and snowboarder, I have many happy memories of skiing at Taos Ski Valley. And so when I looked over the proposal, I'm also on the river, I said, okay, check things off, and okay, they want a gondola, okay, that makes sense. Many places have a gondola now. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, the gondola doesn't go to the top of the mountain. Where else do you want to go when you're a skier? That's the whole point, is to go to the top and ski down. I would literally lay in my bed and look at the trail map and mark all the runs I had skied. And that's the point of like skier satisfaction, is to go to the top of the mountain and ski down. And I thought, well, this is good. It's base-to-base gondola. That's an 800-foot rise. There's no other projects like that. There's a proposed one at Cottonmouth, but that's it. We've never had a gondola like this. If it's for skiers, it should go to the top.
It's going to take summer visitors to the big restaurant.
Yeah, people can decide.
It's actually not for skiers.
And that's the question is...
It's for pass holders, but it's not for people who are actively skiing.
Right.
They'll ride the lift to the top of the mountain. It's for other people who are staying at hotels and eating at restaurants and shopping at shops.
And why is it open? They wanted to...
So they can get from one base to the other easily and spend more money. And it's not open to the public, so if you want to hike to Williams Lake, you can't park at the base and ride the gondola up because they won't let you.
So we just have a few more minutes and then the meeting with the Forest Service. I think some forest officials are going to be here this afternoon. But there were some folks that joined. Ms. Matthews, Kate, nice to see you. I don't know if you want to have any, you didn't get a chance to introduce yourselves or say something. I don't know if you, and for the gentleman.
Oh, I just dropped in and I didn't know about the meeting. I heard about it from Robin and I was in Taos, so I just wanted to see what was going on. And I think that the last thing that was discussed, the gondola route, it's all tied in to the proposal a couple years ago for development in the Kachina Basin. And that, I don't know where that is. I mean, hasn't been any publicity about it, but it was a big deal when it came out. I can't remember what they dubbed it. They did a whole scenario for it of home development, commercial development, and so that tied in with the gondola and the new restaurants and everything else within the existing area is really problematic, and I think that's where they're going.
Alfred?
Alfred?
My name is Alfred Trujillo. I'm a residente of the Acequia de Llano and Rio Hondo. I'm I'm a member of the Community Association of Rio Hondo. I've heard a lot of things, there's a lot of things involved here. Don't know where to start, but I guess a clarification would be that Lobo Creek and Gaina Creek are not above the Ski Valley. They are off to the side. They come in from the north. They're actually over the mountain range from the Ski Valley, over Lobo Peak, to the west. And those drainages, the Gaina and the Lobo drain into the Rio Hondo above Arroyo Hondo but below Valdez. The water rights that Taos Ski Valley has and the village of Taos Ski Valley have, you know, a lot of that, you know, a lot of the water rights that they have that were transferred from the lower villages, they're somehow entitled to what's called return flow credits. That's where, yeah, they take the pristine water, convert it into snow, convert it into sewage, you know, but it all gets treated and it gets put back into the river. And that's where, you know, under that scenario, they'll never run into a deficit, you know, and they already have more water rights, I think as I mentioned, that they need. But basically, I think still at the root of all this, and I hate to say it, and I know people don't like to hear it, but water rights adjudication. You know, we have 3 communities on the Rio Hondo, Valdez, Rio Hondo, Des Montes. We're splintered. You know, the apportionment of water is really not based on priorities. It's based on other factors, acreage, so forth and so on. That we would need to do some work amongst ourselves to settle that issue. There's also some misconceptions about land grants. You know, we're just not connecting the dots in the lower communities.
I think you may have come in after Priscilla's comment, but I think Priscilla was alluding to sort of the need for various parties in the community to kind of bridge some of those local gaps,
yes,
and local
yes.
misunderstandings, right? So I think that's, so I'm sorry to cut you short there.
That's it, that's basically it.
Thank you, and ma'am, I know you came in late.
I'm fine.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm Sabrina Webster. Why am I here? Because my husband sent me an email and said, try to make it to this meeting. I was like, oh, okay. Took me forever to find this place, y'all. But anyway, right now I live in Red River, but I have bought some property in a Rio Hondo that's on an Acequia, and it has an existing water well. It had it there when we bought the place. So I was just curious as to all this talk. I'm not for any Taos Ski Valley having any more expansion. I don't think it needs it. But that's going to be a hard thing to fight.
So again, we thank you. Thank you everybody for being here. I mean, I want to make myself available. You know, I'll work through Judy in particular. So if there's a need to communicate, please send it through Judy through TVAA. If there's a need to have another roundtable like this in another month or two, we can make that happen as long as Judy's available to have a space. If we need to have a larger space, I'm sure we can figure that out. I like the idea of kind of a smaller group because we can spend more time with each other and get to hear what the concerns are. We're having a meeting with the Forest Service in just a few minutes. But
Who's coming from the Forest Service?
Amy Sims,
Okay.
yeah. But, you know, again, I think what I did want to just point out is that we do have some capacity within the treaty division at the moment. You know, we kind of looked into, you know, what the process would look like in terms of litigating a decision. But I won't share that here until I hear from individuals, and really of the Acequias or the land grants that have filed complaints, or not complaints, but objections or comments, in terms of providing some of that guidance to them, in terms of what our research, you know, and you may already be aware of what that process looks like going forward. The Forest Service may tell you anyways this afternoon in terms of where the decision is at and what your options are in terms of litigation. I don't know how open they'll be about that, but still, you know, we want to provide that as well. So I think the three things that we'll offer from the tree division is, again, another opportunity for a roundtable like this, you know, engaging with the Acequias or the land grants that filed objections or comments, and then finally, you know, being involved in the watershed district. I think that's a key tool that could be useful, and again, I think we have the capacity and would want to put some resources toward that from our agency, from our division in particular. So whoever is on that watershed, you know, kind of group.
I'll talk to JR.
Okay, yeah, JR, I'm sorry, that's right, JR.
I'll talk to you.
So,
I already texted him that I'm not.
okay. So, again, as people feel comfortable, if you wouldn't mind signing in, that helps me kind of see who is here and kind of helps refresh my recollection when I talk about this when I go back to the office. So, and thank you, Robin, for recording it. I think it's important, and Phaedra as well. And again, talk to Robin or Phaedra if you would like any of your comments, sort of, I guess, next from the record.
I think that we could potentially be at a point of convergence because there's so many different levels of this, including something we didn't get into, which is the MSF-funded watershed study that's being conducted right now, which is pretty comprehensive. The watershed district, your office, you know, I think that unless the downstream stakeholders seize agency, the future of the watershed will be controlled by resort development, and we will lose these acres.
Thank you.